The year is 1930. A bitter winter wind howls through the jagged peaks of the Carpathian Mountains. A lone traveler, desperate to escape the blinding snowstorm, stumbles upon a solitary inn. A single light glows in the window, a beacon of warmth in the unforgiving wilderness. He pushes open the heavy wooden door to find a quiet, welcoming hearth, but as the night deepens, he soon realizes he is not the only guest. Some who check into the Carpathian Inn have never checked out. This isn't just a story passed down through generations. It's a chilling secret that clings to the very walls of this place, a whisper that refuses to be silenced. Welcome and be warned. You're about to step into the shadows over the Carpathian Inn. If you enjoy tales of mystery and the supernatural, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. I had been traveling for 3 days through the Carpathian foothills when the last train gave up its journey at a nameless station. It was late October of 1930, and the ancient forests seemed to breathe history. The station master, a silent man with eyes like wet stones, had warned me. "You will not find much company on that road, monsieur," he said, "and if you do, you may wish you had not." I just smiled, assuming it was local superstition. I was headed for the Carpathian Inn, an old hunting lodge I'd read about in an obscure guide. I was chasing history, not legends. I hired a carriage, and the driver, an old fellow named Anton, barely spoke once he learned my destination. His hands trembled each time we passed a wayside cross. As the road climbed, the forests grew darker, the great pines leaning over the path like silent conspirators. At one point, I swore I saw something pale flickering between the trees, watching us. We reached a narrow bridge at dusk. Below, a river rushed unseen through the mist. I leaned out to look, but Anton grabbed my sleeve. "Do not look down," he said, his voice tight. "They say the river takes faces." The mist thickened as night fell. The moon rose, wan and colorless. It felt like we'd been traveling for an eternity when, just after midnight, we reached a clearing. Far below, through the fog, I saw faint, flickering lights. "The inn," Anton said, crossing himself. "I go no further." No amount of money could convince him. He left me and my trunk by the road and vanished back into the mist. The sound of his horse's hooves faded, leaving only the whisper of the wind. The path to the inn was steep and broken. When I finally stood before it, I saw that time had gnawed at its walls. The timber beams were warped, the roof sagged, and ivy clung to it like a funeral shroud. Yet there was light inside, the glow of a hearth and the sound of faint music. A peculiar dread washed over me, but the night was cold, so I lifted the iron latch and entered. Inside, warmth enveloped me. The great hall was lit by candles on antlers, their wax running down like tears. A fire roared, casting long shadows. At a long table sat 4 men, all silent, their eyes glistening as they looked up at me. A tall woman came from behind the counter. "You are expected, monsieur," she said. "Expected?" I asked, surprised. "By whom?" She brought me a bowl of stew. The flavor was strange, metallic, like blood from a bitten lip. She told me my room was in the east corridor, the key waiting in the door. I climbed the groaning stairs. The hall above was long and dimly lit, lined with portraits of stern-faced hunters. Their painted eyes seemed to follow me. My room was at the very end. The key was there, just as she'd said. Inside, it was clean but smelled of damp stone and something like decay. As I blew out the lamp, I heard footsteps in the hall. Slow, deliberate, dragging. They stopped at my door, then moved on. I opened it, but the hallway was empty. Only the portraits stared back. When I turned from the door, I found the window open, though I was certain I had shut it. Cold air poured in, carrying a distant, howling sound. Not wolves, not quite human. I went to close it and saw a figure in white on the slope below, standing among the stones of an old cemetery. She was still, but I could feel her gaze. I couldn't see her face, just a pale garment and dark hair moving in the wind. Then the moon hid behind a cloud, and she was gone. I slept little. My dreams were filled with whispers and the vision of that pale figure calling my name, a name I hadn't told anyone here. When I woke, the hall downstairs was empty. The 4 men were gone, their plates untouched. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen, but on the counter lay a small, tarnished silver locket. I opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of the young woman I'd seen among the graves, and etched faintly beneath her image was a name, Elena. The very name whispered in my dreams. Outside, the sun struggled through the fog. I felt then that my journey had only just begun, and this road didn't just lead through the mountains but into their very heart, where light itself was a stranger. This tale is just the beginning of the mysteries hidden in these mountains. If you love stories that send a shiver down your spine, make sure to follow and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. Thanks for watching. The dawn that followed was a pale, hesitant thing. The light didn't so much enter my room as linger uncertainly at its threshold, as if reluctant to trespass. I looked from the window and saw the valley below submerged in mist. The world, it seemed, had lost its edges during the night. I went down to the hall to find the innkeeper, to ask how far the next village was, but the place was deserted. The fire was just a faint red glow, and the dishes on the long table were crusted with cold food, as if a meal had been abandoned in a hurry. I called out, once, then twice, and my voice just fell flat, absorbed by the silence. It was only when I turned toward the stairs that I heard it, the soft scrape of a chair, the faintest sigh. A man stood in the doorway to the parlor. He was tall, thin, and dressed in clothes from another age. His coat was dark velvet, his cravat frayed but carefully tied. His face had the waxy smoothness of someone who hadn't felt sunlight in years. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I seem to be the only guest awake." He just inclined his head. "You are not the only guest, monsieur, merely the newest." I waited for him to say more, but he just gestured to the table. "Breakfast is served. It grows cold quickly here." When I looked again, the plates were no longer crusted but freshly set. Steaming bread, dark jam, and coffee so black it might have been drawn from the mountain itself. I couldn't remember hearing anyone prepare it. The man sat opposite me, his curious gray-green eyes studying my face with a little too much intensity. "You arrived late last night," he said. "Few travelers come this way anymore. The passes are treacherous and the forest has a hunger of its own." "I was bound for the old imperial road," I explained. "I study the remnants of the Austro-Hungarian routes, their architecture, their customs." He smiled faintly. "Ah, a scholar. We have not had one of those for a long time." Something in his tone made me pause. "We?" "The guests," he said simply. Before I could ask, 2 others entered. A middle-aged woman in a faded crimson gown, and a boy no older than 10, pale as chalk, clutching a wooden toy horse. They greeted me with solemn politeness and took their seats without a sound. The woman poured coffee, her hands trembling. "The mornings here are cruelly long," she murmured to the air. "One loses count of them after a while." The boy's eyes met mine. "Do you dream, monsieur?" he asked. "I beg your pardon?" "In your room, do you dream?" "Yes," I admitted, though I wish I did not. He nodded as if satisfied. "Then the house likes you." I tried to smile, but my appetite had vanished. The bread, when I bit it, had the faint taste of earth. After breakfast, I wandered the corridors. The architecture was stranger than I'd noticed. The halls curved subtly, never quite straight, and doors were different sizes, as if meant for someone not quite human. The portraits on the walls returned my gaze with unnerving fidelity. In some, the faces seemed altered, their eyes following my steps. At the end of one corridor, a narrow door stood ajar. Inside was a small chapel. A single candle burned on the altar, and beneath it, an old ledger bound in cracked leather. Curiosity 1. I opened it. The pages were filled with names, hundreds of them, each followed by a date. The earliest was from 1682. The most recent was dated 2 nights ago, and my own name was the last. The ink was still wet. I slammed the book shut, my heart thudding. The candle flickered violently. From behind me came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. I turned, but the doorway was empty. Back in the corridor, everything felt different. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. Faint whispers slid from behind the plaster. I rushed back to the main hall, but it was no longer as it had been. The windows were shuttered. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass like something alive. The man in the velvet coat stood by the hearth, his eyes gleaming. "You found the book," he said. I started. "How?" He raised a hand. "We all find it, sooner or later. The house shows it when it chooses." "What is it? A guest register?" He smiled without warmth. "In a manner of speaking. Those who write their names within seldom depart." His words hung in the air, and the fire flared high. For a second, I saw faces twisted in silent agony, reaching from within the flames. I stumbled back. When I blinked, they were gone. The woman in crimson entered, her expression serene. "Do not frighten him," she told the man. "He is not ready." "Ready for what?" I demanded. "For understanding," she replied softly. The boy appeared beside her. "They never leave," he whispered, holding up his toy horse. I couldn't bear it. I grabbed my coat and lunged for the door. But when I opened it, the world outside had changed. The clearing was gone, replaced by a wall of fog so dense it seemed solid. The path was gone. The trees were gone. Only whiteness, endless and soundless. I stepped forward, and the mist swallowed my outstretched hand, gripping my skin with a cold that felt alive. I retreated, slamming the door. The man in velvet watched me with faint amusement. "You see? The mountain keeps what it receives." "I refuse to believe this," I said. "There must be another road." "There is none," he interrupted. "We have all tried." I stared at him, at the woman, at the silent child. "You mean you're prisoners here?" "In a sense," the woman said, "though prison implies time. Time has little meaning once the house has taken notice of you." She stepped closer, and I saw her eyes were entirely colorless, as if drained by centuries of waiting. "The inn stands upon old ground," she continued. "Beneath it runs a river older than the mountains. The dead whisper through its waters. When the house was built, the stones remembered them, and the walls learned to hunger." A terror beyond reason filled me. I turned and ran, desperate to find my luggage, to flee. But the hallways twisted like a serpent. No matter how far I walked, I always ended up back at the same spot: the hearth, the portraits, the staring faces. Night fell without a sunset. The lamps lit themselves, and the inn came alive with faint music and muffled laughter. Driven by a desperate need to see, I climbed to the upper floor. At the landing, a door I hadn't noticed before stood half open. Inside, a long table was laid for a feast. In each chair sat a figure, some skeletal, some mummified, some so lifelike I couldn't tell if they breathed. At the head of the table, a man in an old military uniform, his face hidden by shadow, raised his cup. The others followed. Then, the light that seeped through my window felt ancient, the color of old bone. I woke up with this chilling certainty that someone, or something, had been watching me all night long. The candle was just a waxy puddle. The air was bitter cold, and there, on the floor, were tiny bare footprints in the frost, leading right from my door to the side of my bed. For a long time I just lay there, frozen. The memories from the night before, that dark river, the faces in the water, and the woman, Elena. It all felt like a fever dream. But was it? The footprints were real. The chill was real. and even now I could hear faint whispers like a tide of voices rising and falling just at the edge of my hearing. I finally got up and opened my door. The hallway was dark, the lamps all out. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but through it I could see another set of footprints, small, bare, and leading away towards the chapel. I had to follow. The chapel was even colder than before. The altar candle had burned down into a waxen, claw-like shape. And the guest ledger. It was still open to the page with my name. But now, right below my entry, a new name had appeared, written in that same elegant script. Elena Markova, 1682. My heart hammered against my ribs. The ink was still wet, but the date, it was impossible. As I stared, I heard it again. The faint sound of moving water from somewhere below. The same sound from the cavern. I don't know what pulled me, but I went back down into those lower corridors. The air grew thick, smelling of damp earth and old smoke. The stone walls seemed to be weeping, and in the moisture I could see faint patterns, faces, hands, as if the very stone had absorbed centuries of sorrow. And there it was. The iron door. It was open. Beyond it lay the cavern. It was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows, the black river moving sluggishly through the gloom, whispering with 1,000 lost voices. And on the bank, kneeling, was Elena. She was just as I remembered, pale and luminous, but she seemed less solid now, like she was made of mist. "You should not have come again," she said, her voice a whisper. "I had to know," I told her. "What is this place? What are you?" She rose slowly. The inn feeds on that kind of hunger. It draws you down, deeper and deeper, until you belong to it. "I saw our names in the book," I said, my voice shaking. "Yours had a date from the 1600s. What does it mean?" Her eyes, full of a sorrow that felt centuries deep, met mine. "I was the first," she said. "My husband built this inn. He ignored the villagers' warnings that the ground was cursed, that the river below was the blood of the earth. When the inn was finished, the ground gave way during the celebration feast. The river rose and took us all, but it didn't grant me death. It marked me, binding me here." She stepped closer, the air around her turning icy. "Every guest brings a spark of life the house craves. It offers comfort and warmth, and in return, it takes what burns brightest inside you." "There has to be a way to end it," I insisted. She shook her head. "Curses only end when there's nothing left to sustain them. We bind each other here, guest after guest, year after year." Her trembling hand reached for my face. "But you're different. The house fears something in you." Before I could ask what she meant, the river surged. The cavern filled with hundreds of crying voices, all calling her name. Figures began to rise from the water, translucent, half-formed shapes of past guests, their eyes black voids. The man in the velvet coat, the woman in crimson, even the little boy with the wooden horse. "You cannot keep him," the man in velvet rasped. "He belongs to the house," the woman added softly, "as we all do." The spirits advanced on her. "Go!" Elena screamed at me, "before they remember your warmth." Her cold hand touched mine, and in that instant I saw the inn as she did. A living, breathing entity with shifting corridors like veins, all fed by the black river at its heart. Then her fingers slipped from mine, and the river pulled her under. I screamed her name until my voice broke. When I finally stumbled back into the corridor, the iron door slammed shut behind me with a final, echoing click. Upstairs, the man in velvet was waiting by the fire. "You have gone where none of us dared," he said calmly. "And now you carry her with you." I looked at my hands. They were glistening, as if wet from the river. A chill had seeped deep into my bones. "What have I done?" I whispered. "You have taken something from the river," he replied, "and left something behind." I turned to run, but the front door no longer led outside. Through the frame was only a thick, waiting darkness. Then I felt it. a faint pulse beating inside my chest that wasn't my own, and a voice whispered in my mind, soft as the river's flow. The door is not where you think. Back in my room, a new sentence had been added to my journal, in handwriting that was not mine. The river waits. The frost on the window had formed the shape of a woman's face, her lips parted as if to speak, and when I pressed my hand against the cold glass, I felt water on the other side. Thank you so much for joining me on this chilling journey. If you enjoy stories that get under your skin, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there. The wind had turned cruel by the time night fell again. It beat against the inn's rafters with a steady, ghostly rhythm, like an unseen hand knocking softly, persistently on the old beams. I hadn't been able to rest since that strange encounter by the Black River. Elena's pale face, the quiet terror in her eyes, it followed me into every shadow, every whisper of wind that crept under the shutters. At supper, Herr Kovacs was unusually withdrawn. He sat at the far end of the long table, staring into the fire, his food untouched. It was just the three of us that evening, the innkeeper, his stooped old servant, and me. The other guests, if they even existed anymore, had vanished. Not a voice from the upper floors, no footsteps, no clinking glasses. Only a heavy, complete silence. After the meal, Kovacs excused himself without a word. The servant cleared the table, moving like a ghost. His hands trembled as he reached for the plates. When he leaned close to take my cup, I noticed his nails were blackened, as though he'd been clawing at earth or stone. I asked him if he'd lived here long. He paused, the candlelight trembling in his watery eyes. Long enough, he murmured, to forget the faces of those who left. He seemed to realize he'd said too much, bowed, and slipped away. The fire dwindled, and the night deepened. I sat alone in the common room, too unnerved to climb the stairs to my room. The stillness was so profound I could hear the snow melting from the eaves, drop by drop, like a slow, ticking clock. That's when I saw it, a dark outline on the far wall. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A rectangular shape, darker than the wood around it. It looked as if a door had been sealed and painted over. I grabbed a candle and went closer. The flame danced wildly in a sudden draft. As I ran my fingers along the outline, I felt it. A narrow seam beneath the paint, the unmistakable edge of a hidden panel. A door. A chill so fierce it made me stagger shot through me. I could feel a faint pulse of cold air from the other side, rhythmic, as if something were breathing. I should have turned away. I should have gone to my room, locked the door, and waited for morning. But curiosity, that ancient curse, wouldn't let me go. I grabbed the fire poker and started scraping at the edges. The old wood was brittle, and paint flaked away like dead skin. Slowly, a thin crack appeared, top to bottom. The sound echoed through the silent inn. After a few minutes, the panel gave way with a groan that sounded almost human. A narrow door of ancient oak stood before me, its handle rusted. My hand trembled, but I turned the latch. The hinges shrieked, and a rush of cold, damp air met me, carrying the smell of stone and rot. My candle revealed a narrow passage sloping down, its wet, rocky walls glistening. I called out, but the darkness just swallowed the sound. So I stepped inside. The floor descended in uneven steps carved right into the mountain. The ceiling was low, dripping water. The further I went, the stronger the odor became. Earth, mildew, and something metallic underneath, like old blood. Then I saw markings scratched into the wall, crude spirals and intersecting lines that seemed to pulse in the flickering light. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. In the center stood a waist-high stone slab. On it lay a long object wrapped in yellowed linen, and beside it, impossibly, a single candle was still burning. The air was thick, heavy, crushing. Drawn by a mix of dread and fascination, I moved closer. The wrapping was bound with dark twine. I bent down and saw a name, faintly inked, half-faded, Elena Dragos. I reeled back, the name burning into my mind. Before I could run, the air shifted. A faint sigh rose from the slab. The linen stirred. My candle flickered violently. I turned to flee, but the passage was gone. A seamless stone wall stood where the opening had been. I was trapped. I pounded on the cold surface, shouting until my throat was raw, but only silence answered. Then a voice, low and mournful, drifted not from the slab but from inside my own mind. You opened the way. The candle flared. The linen split open, and from within a pale, slender hand rose, reaching for the light. When I awoke, I was on the floor of the common room. The fire was out. The wall was smooth, as if the door had never been there. Herr Kovacs stood over me, his face a mask. "You should not wander at night," he said quietly. "Some doors were meant to remain unseen." He helped me to my room, and before closing the door, he added, almost to himself, "She remembers those who wake her." The wind rose again, and somewhere deep beneath the inn I could hear it, faint, rhythmic, breathing. I knew, with a cold certainty, that whatever I had disturbed had not gone back to sleep. Thank you for joining me on this chilling tale. If you enjoy stories that lurk in the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. Stay curious, but be careful which doors you open. Morning arrived like a reluctant guest, gray and cold. The fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the valley, wrapping the inn in a thick shroud that muffled every sound. When I came downstairs, Herr Kovacs was sitting by the cold hearth, his gaze lost in the embers as if memories were stones dragging him down into the depths. He gave me a brief nod, but the silence between us was heavy, like dust in a forgotten room. I wanted to ask him about the sealed door, about the name Elena, but the words wouldn't come. I was afraid that speaking of it would somehow make it real, and that fear was stronger than my disbelief. The day dragged on in a tense, monotonous quiet. The inn felt more deserted than ever, its rooms echoing with unseen movements. A whisper down the hall, the slow creak of floorboards as if someone was walking just beneath them. Sometimes I thought I heard a faint melody, like tiny bells carried on the wind. By evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found the old servant, the man who'd warned me with his frightened eyes. He was in the cellar, kneeling by the wine barrels, his face slick with a cold sweat. When I mentioned the sound of bells, his head snapped up. His expression was pure horror. "You heard them?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "The bells beneath the floor?" I nodded. He crossed himself, a small, shaky motion. "They ring when the sleepers stir," he said, leaning closer. "Herr Kovacs claims it's just the old pipes, but I know better. They're older than this inn, older than the village." His voice cracked. "There was a chapel here, long ago before the inn was built. It was swallowed by the earth during a storm that lasted 7 nights. The villagers said the mountain took it back, and everyone who was praying inside." He turned away, drained. "At night," he murmured, "they still sing their prayers. You can hear them if you listen for too long." I went back to my room, a deep unease settling over me. As night fell, thick and absolute, I gave in to the urge to listen. I pressed my ear to the wooden floor. At first there was only the wind, but then, faint as a memory, a sound rose from below, a sorrowful chiming of bells in a strange, uneven rhythm. The sound vibrated through the wood, through my very bones, like the pulse of something enormous sleeping deep within the earth. And then, voices. A low, droning chant in a language I'd never heard. It rose and fell with the bells, weaving a pattern that felt wrong, unnatural. My candle flame flickered as if in a breeze. The walls themselves seemed to breathe with the sound. A shadow crept along the floor, not cast by my candle, but moving with the pulse of the bells. Heart hammering against my ribs, I stumbled out into the corridor. The air was thick with the same humming vibration. Half mad with a mix of fear and curiosity, I followed the sound to a small storage door near the kitchen. The old latch gave way, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. This was a different passage, older, carved directly into the stone. The sound grew louder with each step. The bells were clear now, their notes trembling in the cold air. The chanting had stopped, replaced by soft, whispering sound, like countless breaths being exhaled at once. The stairs opened into a wide cavern. In the center, half buried in debris, stood what looked like an ancient altar. And then I saw them. Dozens of small brass bells, embedded in the stone floor, their cords disappearing into the rock. As I watched, one began to sway. Then another. The air grew thick with the sweet, cloying scent of funeral lilies. A sound like distant thunder rumbled, and the stone floor split open. Pale, weightless shapes rose from the fissure, shimmering like mist but with the faint outlines of human faces. Their mouths moved, whispering, their eyes like dark, burning hollows. They circled above the bells, drawn together like smoke. I felt their sorrow press in on me, an ancient grief that felt as solid as the mountain itself. One of them drifted closer. Her face was clearer than the others, and my blood ran cold. It was Elena. She raised a hand, pointing upward toward the inn. Her lips moved, and though I heard nothing, I understood the message. He knows. Then, just as suddenly, they dissolved. The fissure sealed, the bells fell silent, and the stillness that remained was more terrifying than the noise. When I climbed back up, dawn was breaking. Herr Kovacs was waiting for me. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You have gone too far," he said, his voice soft but sharp as glass. "The mountain remembers every footstep." Before I could answer, he turned and vanished into his study. I stood there, trembling, and realized the faint vibration under my feet hadn't stopped. The bells were still ringing, faintly, as if from deep inside my own heart. Thanks for joining me on this descent into the darkness. If you love stories that linger in the shadows, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the edge of the unknown. Stay curious and stay safe. The cold in the inn deepened by the day, a chill that defied the roaring fire in the hearth. It felt as if the very walls were draining the warmth away, pulling it down into some hidden, hungry heart beneath the earth. The villagers had long stopped their supply runs up the mountain. Even the mail coach, once a reliable sight, had vanished without a trace. Herr Kovacs, the innkeeper, no longer shared meals with me. He'd secluded himself in his private rooms, communicating only through his servant. The poor man wouldn't meet my eyes, his hands trembling as he'd set down my meager tray of bread and thin broth. Every night I'd hear the innkeeper pacing in the room above, his steps heavy and restless. Sometimes I'd hear the sound of furniture being dragged or something heavier, something less easily explained. But the bells haunted me most of all. They no longer chimed from beneath the floorboards. Instead, they echoed in my dreams. I'd wake with a start in the dead of night, the memory of their tolling quivering in my skull, soft and slow like a forgotten memory. It was on one of these sleepless nights that I found the attic door. The upstairs corridor had always ended at a blank wall, but as I paced the dim hall, my candle throwing dancing shadows, I saw it, a thin, almost invisible line where plaster met wood. The wall had shifted, revealing a hidden seam. I pressed, and a section of the wall gave way with a dusty sigh. A narrow, crooked staircase rose into the darkness. The air that drifted down was colder than anywhere else in the inn, carrying a strange scent of old wax and decay, masked by a hint of lavender. I hesitated. I knew what my curiosity had already cost me, yet the suffocating silence of the inn was too much to bear. I had to know. So I began to climb. The attic was vast and low-ceilinged, its wooden beams black with soot. Pale bands of moonlight cut through cracks in the roof, illuminating a mess of old furniture and cloth-covered trunks. Dust lay over everything like a burial shroud. At first I thought the attic was empty. But then, my candlelight caught the edge of a tall frame leaning against the far wall, draped in a faded sheet. I moved towards it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As I pulled the cloth away, a cloud of dust billowed out like a spirit released from a tomb. The painting beneath was enormous, nearly the height of a man. It depicted a woman by a river, her face half turned as if she were listening for something just beyond the frame. The artist's skill was undeniable. Her eyes seemed alive, her lips poised on the verge of a whisper. It was Elena, but not the Elena I'd met by the Black River. This woman was vibrant, full of life. Her dress shimmered like silk, and rings sparkled on her fingers. But the landscape behind her was wrong. The mountains were twisted into unnatural shapes. The river ran black as ink, and the trees leaned in like mourners at a grave. I felt a wave of dizziness. For a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw her lips move. "Leave," she seemed to whisper. Or perhaps the sound came from behind me. I spun around, but the attic was empty. I turned back to the portrait, and my blood ran cold. Her expression had changed. Her eyes were now fixed directly on me, and they were filled with a profound, soul-crushing grief. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my candle. Its flame threw wild, monstrous shadows across the walls, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of smaller portraits arranged in a semicircle. They were all covered in dust, but the faces beneath were unmistakable. Men and women, young and old, all painted with the same unnerving, lifelike detail. And in every single one, the same black river flowed in the background. I moved to the nearest portrait and wiped away the grime. The man was a traveler, holding a map. I froze. I recognized his face from the coachman's stories, the merchant who had vanished 3 years ago. The next painting showed a woman in mourning clothes, the widow from the inn's registry. One by one, I uncovered their faces, my dread mounting with each revelation. The priest, the couple from Vienna, the soldier, they were all here, preserved, and in the very center, an unfinished canvas stood on an easel. The faint outline was unmistakable, the curve of a shoulder, the ghost of a face. My face. The paintbrush beside it was still wet. A footstep broke the silence. I turned. Herr Kovac stood in the doorway, a lantern held high, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. "So," he said softly, "you found her gallery." I couldn't speak. He stepped closer. "She paints them, you see. Those who stay, those who cannot leave." His voice was strangely calm, almost reverent. Elena was an artist before the fever took her. The mountain loved her gift and wouldn't let it die. Now it paints through her, and through me. "You're mad," I whispered, backing away. He just smiled faintly. "Madness is only the door you fear to open." The lantern light made the portraits shimmer, their eyes glistening as if wet with tears. "She wakes when they forget her," he said, "and you, my friend, have remembered too well." Something stirred behind the large painting of Elena. A soft rustle, like cloth disturbed by a sudden breath. The air grew thick, the lavender scent turning sharp and cloying. The canvas began to bulge outward. I ran. Down the stairs, through the corridor, and out into the biting cold of the night. The fog wrapped around me, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard it. The faint chime of bells, slow and mournful, marking my escape. When I finally dared to look back, the windows of the inn were glowing with a golden light, as if hundreds of candles had been lit inside. For just an instant, I saw faces in the windows, pale and still, watching me go. Among them was Elena, and beside her, another shape, unfinished, faceless, waiting. The snow returned that night, soft and silent, falling in great pale veils over the valley. The mountain seemed to breathe beneath it, exhaling mist that coiled through the trees. I thought I had fled far from the Carpathian Inn, but when dawn came, I found myself standing before its door once more. It was impossible. I had walked for hours, marking my path, but the forest had turned itself inside out, circling back like a noose. The inn stood unchanged, smoke drifting from its chimney, though no scent of burning wood reached me. Something whispered that to turn away again would be useless. The mountain had drawn its circle around me. So I went inside. The air was stale and cold, carrying a faint perfume of lavender and dust. But it was as though years had passed in a single night. The hearth was dead, the furniture draped in cobwebs. On the reception desk lay the guest register. I traced the names with numb fingers. Elena Dragos, Father Marcu, the Viennese couple, my own. And beneath mine, a final name had been added in a different hand, faint but unmistakable. Kovacs. A noise stirred from above. The inn was not empty. I ascended the groaning staircase, the air growing colder with every step until my breath rose in clouds. All the doors to the guest room stood open, revealing rooms stripped bare. All but one. It was mine. The key was still in the lock. My hand trembled as I turned it. The room was exactly as I had left it, but on the wall, where there had been only shadow, now hung a painting. My portrait. It was finished. The resemblance was perfect. Every line of my face, every crease of fear around my eyes. But the eyes were alive, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I reached out a trembling hand and felt warmth. From behind the canvas came the faintest pulse, like a heartbeat. The sound of a door opening behind me froze my blood. Herr Kovacs stood in the doorway, or what remained of him. His skin was as pale as wax, his eyes hollow. His voice, when it came, was thin and distant. "She finished it," he said. "It is her gift, and her curse. The mountain takes what it loves and keeps it where time cannot reach. Do you feel it now? The bells are calling for you." I could hear them, faint, trembling, rising from deep below. The floor seemed to vibrate with their tone. "It will be easier if you don't resist," Kovacs whispered, stepping closer. I stumbled back, my shoulders striking the painting. At the touch, the surface rippled like flesh, and a voice whispered from inside the canvas. Elena's voice, faint but clear. "Help me." Kovacs flinched. "No, she is not yours to save." The floorboards shuddered. Cracks split the plaster. The bells tolled again, louder now, their rhythm wild. The portraits in the hallway began to weep thick, dark liquid. The air filled with the scent of earth and decay. I seized the lantern from Kovacs' hand and hurled it at my portrait. The glass shattered, and the flame caught the canvas. It burned with unnatural speed, the face within contorting in agony. Kovacs screamed in despair, rushing forward, trying to smother the fire with his bare hands as he sobbed Elena's name. The fire leaped from frame to frame, devouring the gallery of faces. The walls cracked open, pouring out black smoke that writhed like living things. I fled through the collapsing hall, down the stairs that split beneath my feet. Outside, the snow fell thickly, muffling the roar of the inferno. I turned to see the inn engulfed in flames, and through the fire I could still hear the faint tolling of bells beneath the earth. Then, silence. The fire burned until morning. Villagers found no trace of bodies, no remains, only the ashes, and within them, a single object untouched by flame, a small brass bell. I keep it still. Some nights it is silent. Others it trembles faintly as if stirred by breath. And when winter comes, I dream of snow falling over the valley, and of Elena standing in the doorway of the inn, her eyes filled with sorrow, waiting for the next traveler, for me to return. Thank you so much for listening to this tale. If you enjoy stories like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me. Stay safe, and see you in the next one.